Yo, yo, yo. I fucked up my intro. How are y'all doing, man? Welcome back to yet another college football video. I'm a little pissed to be honest. I recorded this shit yesterday, but the file didn't save, so I'm gonna be a day late on this video, but I'm gonna do it regardless. The grind does not stop. Let's get right into it, man. Let's get first into where we left off at. We've got through the bottom tier, I should say, the playoff long shots. A lot of good teams in there, but in this next group, we're gonna be talking about teams where it's like I would not be shocked if two or even three of these next six teams I talk about are in the playoff, and I could really see a scenario where all of these teams could possibly make the college football playoff. So let's get right into it, man. I'm excited. And thank you for watching. Starting off, number 19, I got Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy, he's been there since 2005. And here's the thing, they've made a bowl game at Oklahoma State for 18 years in a row. That's incredible to me. I know a lot of people talk about Mike Gundy as one of like the better coaches in college football, but I didn't realize 18 straight years of making a bowl game. That really is something to like that's a real accomplishment right there. And by the way, he's 12-6 in those bowl games. So we're talking about a 67% win rate. So, I still can't believe that they beat Oklahoma last year. That was their most impressive win. But here's the thing about Oklahoma State. Last season is blown so out of proportion. They had some bad losses. We're going to get into it. They had some horrible losses. They were not consistent whatsoever. And I feel like people are rating them way too highly going into next season. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Oklahoma State. First of all, let's take a look at their stats last season and what they were as a team. It's kind of interesting. They had one of, if not the best running backs in the country, but they were only 67th in rushing yards per game. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it. You know, if you have like a top running back that gets over 2,000 yards like Ollie Gordon, it probably means that he's getting like damn near all the touches at running back. For the teams that are like top five, top 10 in rushing yards per game, you probably got to have like two or three good running backs as well as a quarterback that's running for like damn near 1,000 yards. So that's what all the teams in the top of the running, the running yards per game, that's how they look like. But Oklahoma State, it was Ollie Gordon or bust, but they were still pretty good. Top 25 in passing yards, bottom 10 in sacks allowed. That's pretty good. But defensively, man, look at that Oklahoma State defense. It was not anything that you want to see in terms of defensive stats. If they were not top 20 in takeaways, man, we'd really be talking about one of the worst units in the country last season. And that's just everybody's glossing over that. I have not seen anybody mention Oklahoma State's defense and how it's like they were ass last year. It's like, how can you put this team in the real top of your near the top, I should say, of your list when they have a complete liability of a defense? But let's get into the roster though. Taking a look here, you got Alan Bowman at quarterback. And quite frankly, he is one of the worst quarterbacks on this entire top 30 list. He had a touchdown to interception ratio last year of 15-14. And it's not like he was a freshman or a sophomore. The guy was like 24 last season, and he's coming back for yet another year. We got Unk at quarterback here. I feel like if he was going to be good at this point, he just would have been good. I'm not expecting this guy to take a massive jump or anything, but I mean, I guess having the same starter back to back years helps, but I'm really just not impressed with what they have at quarterback. The real star of this entire team, the best player on the team by a mile, is Ollie Gordon. He might be the best running back in the entire country. And I say that, as seriously as possible. The man had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage last season. And look, they need him to really carry them, literally and figuratively, if they want to accomplish their goals next season. Um, Rashad Owens and Brennan Presley are their top two receivers. I really do like that duo. They combined for nearly 2,000 yards last season, and it's a good top two to have. I think it could take some pressure off of Alan Bowman, and it gives them the possibility to be a dangerous passing attack and not just rely entirely on Ollie Gordon. Um, the thing I don't like, they only have two players out of the transfer portal that are supposed to be starters. One is a tight end and the other is a defensive lineman. But especially defensively, I feel like they were so bad. Just take a look at the numbers again, if you will. Bottom 10 in yards allowed, bottom 10 in passing yards, bottom, you know, bottom tier in sacks, points, rushing yards, to only bring in one new starter. via the transfer portal. I don't like that. I feel like they needed more help there and they need major improvements, and they did not go out and aggressively try and do that. So I'm a little concerned there for Oklahoma State defensively. Let's take a look at their schedule. Taking a look at what they did last season, like I said, it baffles me that they were able to beat Oklahoma, especially considering the fact that they lost to South Alabama and UCF by a combined 10 to 78. 10 to 78 is what they lost combined to South Alabama and UCF. And it's not like those were back-to-back games. Those are like 2 months apart that they lost those two games, and they still managed to win 10 games somehow. It's kind of crazy to me. Um, Biggest win, like I said, came against Oklahoma. They did also end up beating Kansas and Kansas State. That Kansas State game, I thought they were completely dead after that 2-2 start, but they pulled it out, 5 in a row. Um, Taking a look at next season, they made the Big 12 championship, got stomped on by Texas. That was never even competitive. Next season, they play three of my top 30, and there's the thing, right? It's a relatively easy schedule, right? Especially for the Big 12, but that doesn't really matter because they could lose to Tulsa for all we know. Tulsa on the road, that's not that is not a guarantee for Oklahoma State considering what they did last year. So I simply don't think that they're going to win the Big 12, but making the Big 12 championship game is not out of the picture for me. So overall here, I'd say their entire season depends on if Ollie Gordon can put up 2,000 plus yards again, but they need improvements elsewhere. Like they need either Alan Bowman to, reach another level, or they need major improvements in that defense. So I can see 10 wins, but I really don't think the playoffs are in the hopes for Oklahoma State. Moving on. Number 18, I got NC State. And this is an interesting one, because it's higher than they were ranked at any point last season. So I'm kind of putting a lot of faith into them here. And I am predicting NC State to do something which they have not done since 2002, that being winning 10 games. Okay. They have not won a bowl game in the last 6 years either. So I'm predicting them to really break through next season. And here's the interesting thing. In my mind, I kind of think as NC or sorry, I kind of think of NC State as this, really good 9 to 10 win team every year, but that's not really the case. They never win a bowl game, and they have not won 10 games since 2002. So I guess they're like a hardcore fans team. Like most casuals, I think don't really keep up with NC State or know much about NC State, but I feel like they're always around there and they always win a couple of games in the ACC. That kind of shocks some people. So next season, I really feel like is their real chance. Like if you look at the roster, look at their schedule, it's going to be hard for me to find a way that they don't end up making the ACC championship game. Let's take a look here at what they were last year. Now, they made a lot of changes offensively, okay? So, because it was not good. Look, they were 100th in passing yards per game. That might be the lowest of any team on my entire top 30 because they had Brennan Armstrong at quarterback, and it was not good. It was not good at all last year. They weren't top 30 in anything. They didn't turn it over that much, I guess, but that's not necessarily, it doesn't make up for all the other flaws there. Defensively, they were pretty good. I'd say they were like a top 20, top 15 defense in the country, mainly due to Peyton Wilson. He was arguably the best linebacker on earth in college football last year. So that certainly helped a lot. But unfortunately, you're going to be without him moving forward. Let's take a look at their roster here. I want to point out the first two things offensively here because I think this is where the most change is going to need to take place. I'd point out first the quarterback, Grayson McCall, coming in to replace Brennan Armstrong. Grayson McCall comes in from Coastal Carolina. He has a lot of experience. I believe he played there for 5 years. And here's the thing. If you look at his touchdown to interception ratio, the last 3 years he was healthy, which is from 2020, 2021, and 2022, his touchdown to interception ratio was 77 to 8. So I think it's fair to say he was low key kind of dominant at the Coastal Carolina when he was healthy. So hopefully you're trying to get that production out of him next year at NC State. Jordan Waters comes in from Duke. He had nearly 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns last season, and the only issue was for him was that he didn't get enough touches. If he would have got more touches, I'm sure we're talking about him as one of the better running backs in the country. So I'm hoping they use him better than they were able to use any other running back last season. The best remaining player on this offense is Kevin Conception, the wide receiver. As a true freshman, I believe the man had over 100 touches, 1,100 yards, and 10 touchdowns. They used him as a wide receiver and a running back, and he was so explosive. He just succeeded in both roles very well. So, like I said, offensively, I circle that big three at the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. They need to do a lot of work here, but I think just the three of them alone, regardless of anybody else they have, should be a massive upgrade over what they had last season. Defensively, like I said, they lost their best player on their entire roster, Peyton Wilson. But I would hope they bring in three new transfer players that they could still be a top 30 to top 40 defense. And I do believe the massive jump offensively is going to be able to pick up some of the slack for the defensive drop that I think is kind of inevitable when you lose a player of Peyton Wilson's caliber. Moving on to their schedule. Taking a look at what they did last season, all four of their losses were to pretty good teams, I'd say. And all four of those games, their offense failed, it basically failed to show up. Notre Dame, you're probably not putting up 45 regardless. I say that was the defense's fault. Louisville, they hold Louisville to 13. Offense can't win that game. The Duke game, they hold Louisville to 24. The Duke defense just absolutely shut down NC State. And then in their bowl game, Kansas State, you'd like to score more than 19 points in a bowl game, I'd assume. So I think the offense certainly you could point to being the problem last year for NC State, but they did win their last five conference games and a couple of really good wins in there. Clemson, Miami, North Carolina. They finished the regular season very, very strong. And taking a look at next season, they only play two of my top 30. So if you're keeping track of like what these other teams are playing, they have one of the easiest schedules in of any team. And both of those top 20 or sorry, both of their top 30 opponents are in the first month of the season. So if they can just split one of those, it is completely smooth sailing the last 8 games. So take a look there from Northern Illinois to North Carolina. I mean, where's the tough game? They lost to Duke last year. You probably want to circle that, but they get them at home. Duke obviously got a lot worse. On the road at North Carolina, you beat them pretty easily last year. I expect North Carolina to be worse as well. I don't really see the game that they can lose in that final 8. So the big question for NC State is, can you beat either Tennessee or Clemson? And here's the really interesting thing. There are multiple paths for NC State, I think, to get in the playoffs. Because if you win the ACC championship game, then obviously I think you're probably looking at them as a playoff team, right? Because they're basically guaranteed a spot. But let's say they lose to Tennessee, right? Beat Clemson, and that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wins in a row, right? If they rattled off 10 in a row, we're probably talking about them as a top 10 team, I'd assume, right? They'd be 11-1 going into the ACC championship game. And let's say you lose to a really good team, you're 11-2. Is that not good enough? I mean, they'd probably be fighting for a spot with a lot of 10-2 teams. So maybe they'd get the nod there. So I do think that NC State's schedule is so easy and their offense is going to be so much better. It's like I'm almost guaranteeing them a spot in the ACC championship game. I think their predicted record, I think it was actually sleeping on them a little bit. I forgot just how easy their schedule is down the stretch. I actually think they're going to go 11-3, throw another one in there, and they might even win the ACC championship game. It depends on who they play, really. So overall, I think the ACC is wide open. So if NC State can just beat Clemson, then it's literally smooth sailing. They are the odds-on favorite at that point to win the ACC in my mind. And the key for them is their improved offense, and they should be a real threat to the playoff come December. Next up, number 17, we have Utah. Utah really is like the hardcore fans team. I feel like every real lover of college football probably enjoys watching Utah. They are consistently overlooked, underrated, and head coach Kyle Whittingham really is one of the best in the country. But this is the thing though. I feel like they're getting a little too much credit around the country right now. A lot of the talk I'm hearing about Utah is really I'm just not buying into it. They were not good last season, and that's because of a lot of injuries. Okay, but I do expect them to be much better. But I do not think at all that they are a top 10 a top 12 team. I think Joel Klatt had them in his like top seven. I am not buying that whatsoever. So let's get into it. Their stats last season, I mean, they couldn't throw the football. I know I just said that the NC State being 100th was probably the worst we'd see, but yeah, Utah couldn't throw the ball. It was absolutely embarrassing. I think they had Bryson Barnes and Nate Johnson at quarterback. It was hard to watch, and believe me, I tried to watch. It was not easy. Um, Defensively is where they really shine. They had a lot of good players there, a lot of NFL players on that defense, three of which got drafted from what I know. Um, the defense is what tried to keep the team together, but they simply could not compete offensively with some of the teams they played, and it cost them a lot of games. Let's take a look at their roster here. So the big thing with Utah, right, is you get Cam Rising back. He did not play at all last year, which was shocking to me. So he took a full year off to recover from his torn ACL, and it's a question mark. I'm not ready to just say, oh, they get Cam Rising back. They're good. They're set. They're winning the Big 12. I need to see how he looks. He was a very mobile quarterback before he went down. So if he comes back and he's strictly a pocket passer now, I'm not sure if he's as good as he used to be. So I'd like a bit of a grace period here to see how Cam Rising looks back. And I don't love their running back or wide receiver rooms. Micah Bernard, Jalen Glover, it wasn't good enough last season. And their wide receiver core, Money Parks, Micah Pittman, whatever. Here's the thing that really interests me is Dorian Singer. Dorian Singer was a monster at Arizona 2 years ago. He transferred to USC last year, and I really don't know why it didn't work. There was a lot of competition at USC. Taj Washington, Brennan Rice, Mario Williams. There were a lot of options, a lot of mouths to feed. But Dorian Singer kind of just got, tossed to the wayside. He didn't really produce nearly as much as I was expecting. Um, so he comes to Utah now. And if he is Arizona, Dorian Singer, we're talking about a massive addition through the transfer portal. But that remains to be seen. I don't know what Dorian Singer is going to show up there. You also got Brant Keithy at tight end. I mean, the man's like 30 and he's only played like one or two healthy seasons of college football. So I'm just not even expecting the man to play next year. That's kind of really sad to think about, but he just can't stay healthy. So I'm not even going to consider him being like an actual player for them. Defensively, they lost three of their best players to the NFL, notably Jonah Ellis. Jonah Ellis was the only player on this team that got five or more sacks. And I think he had like 13. So they lost like a third of their total team sacks in just that one player. Also, Cole Bishop and Sion Vaki, both of their starting safeties also gone to the NFL. So defensively, I have to expect them to take a step back. So, you know, this whole team really just depends on how good Cam Rising is and how good he looks coming off of a major injury. Because if he's not 100% of what he used to be, this team, it could get ugly pretty fast here. Let's take a look at their schedule. Starting with what they did last year, I mean, four of their five losses were to ranked teams, but in three of those five losses, they didn't even score 10 points. So it's like they weren't even really competitive. In the Oregon State, the Oregon game, Northwestern, that loss was just embarrassing. Um, Arizona, it wasn't really close at all. And they ended up not beating a single team that finished ranked. UCLA was ranked at one point. USC was ranked at one point. Colorado was ranked at one point, but all of them ended up finishing unranked. So none of their losses really hold up too well on paper. Next season, they only play three of my top 30, so I'd say it's a fairly easy schedule. The Oklahoma State and Arizona games, that's kind of what defines their whole season for me next year. Oklahoma State on the road, Arizona at home. Do they split those games? Do they go 2-0? Do they go 0-2? That really kind of defines everything. Because if they go 2-0, you're probably talking about a playoff hopeful and a Big 12 championship lock, right? If they go 0-2, everybody writes them off, and justifiably so. If they go 1-1, you're still kind of, halfway in the door of the playoffs and you still got a good shot at the Big 12 championship game. But those two games, that's, their whole season is riding on that. And, regardless of how those games go, can they run the table? Their last seven. Colorado on the road, I don't think that'll be easy. They played Colorado very close last season. And UCF as the final regular season game, circle that because if Utah is doing really well and they walk into UCF lackadaisical, they could certainly lose that game as well. So an 8 to 9 game win streak, including the Big 12 championship, is all it's very possible, but so is a 9-3 record in the regular season. So a lot of question marks here with Utah. I'll wrap it up here with this. Um, I still have a bad taste in my mouth from last season, so I'm waiting to see how they handle Oklahoma State and Arizona. But if they look good in those two games, I will willingly call them the Big 12 championship favorites. So a lot riding on those two games if you're Utah. Moving on. One of my favorite teams, man, I got Kansas at 16. Head coach Lance Leopold has completely turned Kansas's fortunes around in just the 3 years he's been there. And now he looks to put together his first 10-win season and Kansas's first 10-win season since 2007 was the last time they've won double-digit games. And look, man, he brings back his best roster for sure. No question. This is the year. If you're going to pencil in a year, this is Kansas's year. I'm ready, man. I'm excited. Let's get into it, man. This is what they did last season. They had the backup Jason Bean in for the majority of last season, but I'll say that he was actually one of the best backups in the country. Like all things considered, he played a lot over the last 2 years, and he actually did pretty well. Um, and offensively, the numbers are pretty good. Top 10 in the country in rushing yards, top 20 in points per game, bottom 20 in sacks allowed, damn near top 20 in total yards. They were a very respectable passing game for having a backup quarterback in there. Defensively, that's actually pretty impressive to me. Like they were way better than Oklahoma State, for example. Um, for Kansas to be average or even above average in a couple categories, like they weren't top 50 in anything, but they weren't bottom like 30 in anything either. So I think that's fairly impressive. Like if you were to ask Lance Leopold, if you would take these exact same defensive stats next season, I feel like he'd probably say, yeah, probably you'd like to allow a little less rushing yards than that. Maybe around 140, 150 would be more preferable. You'd probably want to get a few more takeaways. If you're a bad defense, that's usually the thing that kind of can gloss over some of the other errors. So not, certainly not a good defense by any means, but it's something to be said to be average across the board. I think that's a lost art in college football. Let's take a look at the roster here. Starting quarterback Jalen Daniels could be one of the best quarterbacks in the country next season. However, he has only played 12 games over the last 2 seasons. And if he can stay healthy, the sky is really the limit for Kansas. There is nothing that they cannot do next season if Jalen Daniels is healthy and playing well. Their amazing run game was led by star running back Devin Neal. He had nearly 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns by himself last season. And the backup, Daniel Highshaw, he is also very reliable. I think he had like 700 or 800 yards combined, or from scrimmage, I should say, last season. So that duo is very, very impressive. And also, um, the receiving core, they returned their top three receivers. All three of them are back, and all three of them averaged at least 16.8 yards per catch. So they are able to stretch the field vertically very easily. And that was with a backup quarterback. So you bring in Jalen Daniels to be hopefully healthy and available. And this is on paper the best offense in the conference. Like I say that very confidently. The only player they lost, I believe, was the offensive lineman, like Dominic Pooney, I think. But you bring in a transfer guy. I mean, I don't know, man. The offense, I'm not worried about it whatsoever. Defensively, is where I'd have a little bit, of a concern. But you know, they only add one starter through the transfer portal, and the only thing I really ask of this defense is to keep the offense in shootouts. Just do your job. Bend don't break. Get the timely stops. And Kobe Bryant, the cornerback, apparently is one of the best in the country. So keep an eye on him to make some big plays next season. I'm not really too worried about this defense, to be honest. I feel like it's a great offense with an average defense. I've seen a lot of teams, Washington, for example, they didn't need a top 20, top 30 defense to go 14-0. So, you know, it's really just about how good you are situationally, how clutch you are, how you perform in the big time moments. So I'm not too concerned with their roster at all. Taking a look at the schedule here. Um, 3 of their 4 losses last season came against ranked teams, and 3 of their 4 losses also were by one score or less. So I honestly, last season, it's tough to judge. You started off 4-0. The Texas game, you were never winning the Texas game. Oklahoma State, close one. Maybe you should have won. Oklahoma was their signature win. I think they were the first team to beat Oklahoma last season, if I'm not mistaken. That's when they were like top five, I believe. Texas Tech, that's a tough one. You probably wish you could have won that one. Kansas State as well. That's a rivalry game. Always tough to lose that, but they finished strong. Um, I'm just very confident in their team next season. They only play two of my top 30. This is one of the easiest schedules, and one of those is Colorado. So they only play one team in my top 29 next year, and that's Kansas State. So they play zero of my top 20, by the way, and they should be the favorite in every single game they play. That Kansas State game, it's on the road. It's not going to be easy. But look at their first seven games. That is 7-0. They didn't lose to like a bad team last season. Texas Tech was their worst loss, but they don't play at Texas Tech next season. In their first seven, at least. West Virginia on the road, that scares me. But I'm looking at 7-0, to be honest with you. And if they're 7-0, we're probably talking about Kansas in the top 10, right? 7-0 Kansas, I think I would have them in my top 10. Um, so that Kansas State game will be absolutely massive for them. Um, and then after that, the last four, they get Colorado at home. I'm not worried about that. I find it hard to believe that Kansas won't win 10 games in the regular season next year. I'm almost willing to just, pencil that in as a guarantee. And if that's the case, is a Big 12 championship game not, easily achievable? I think it is. I expect Kansas to be in the Big 12 championship game. And if they are, can they win? Who knows? It's going to be an entertaining game for sure. Um, I don't know, man. I really, really like Kansas. Like, this is not just me being biased because I like Kansas. Their schedule is so easy and they return so much production offensively. Like, you return your top two running backs, your top three receivers, your head coach, and your quarterback. How many other teams in the country can say that? I can't think of a single one. So the stars are aligning for Kansas here. I'm not sure how they won't win 10 games. I expect them to win 10 games in the regular season alone. And I can easily see Kansas as the Big 12 champions, which would mean I think Kansas would host a college football playoff game. That would be amazing. I could even see them going undefeated. 13-0 is not out of the picture for Kansas, which would mean they'd be like a top 3 team in the country. Man, would that not be incredible? I'm hoping for it, man. That would be so amazing. It would be so amazing. And I would hop on the bandwagon so early. If they go 7-0, they're like if they go 7-0, they're gonna be in like my top 6 or 7, honestly. Moving on. I got Florida State at 15. You know, everybody knows what happened. They put together a movie-like season last year, 13-0, ACC champions, but they were left out of the college football playoff because their quarterback got hurt, and everybody knew that they were not the same team without him, and that got proven in the Orange Bowl. Georgia did unspeakably awful and terrible things to them that I will not even mention, 63-3. And yeah, the season ended horribly, and it's almost like everybody forgets that they went 13-0. But it's a fully different roster. Everybody went to the NFL, so it's a lot of change took place here. Let's talk about it. Statistically, they weren't that good offensively compared to what you might have expected. I think the stats are a little bit skewed because of their last 3 games. They just didn't do well at all. So I'd say they probably were like a top 20 or 30 offense in the country before those last 3 games. But, it got bad pretty fast. Defensively was where they really shone, or they really shined, I should say. Um, you know, top 10 in sacks per game, basically top 10 in passing yards allowed. Didn't get too many takeaways, but it was such a well rounded team. They really did not have any flaws. And when Jordan Travis was playing healthy, they truly were one of the 4 best teams in the country. It does suck that he got down, or he went down with that injury, I should say. It was really, really tough to see. But here's what the new roster looks like at Florida State. You bring in DJ Wingalele from Oregon State. And here's the thing, right? He's the biggest player. He's the most important player on this entire scene. I think I think the story is kind of out on him, right? We've seen him the last 2 years in 2 different situations, and honestly, I was not impressed with either one. People try and for some reason make it seem like he was a whole different guy at Oregon State and he was so much better, but he was worse statistically. And I'd argue he had more help last year at Oregon State than he had at Clemson. So honestly, I think the story's kind of out on DJU. He's an average quarterback. If you surround him with amazing talent, he can probably win you 8 to 9 games, but don't ask much more of that. He's not going to. Yo, yo, yo. 1 second. Let me make sure this is good. Okay. Sorry, try to make sure my mic is fixed now. So what was I saying? DJU, the story is out on him. I don't expect him to do much more than we've seen already from him at quarterback. But here's the thing: the rest of the roster, I expect them with Lawrence Tafili, Roydale Williams. I expect this to be one of the better running teams in the country. Their wide receiver core is extremely unproven. Their top guys all went to the NFL, so I can't tell you anything about their top three, to be honest with you. So I expect between DJU, Lawrence Tafili, Roydale Williams, this might still be a top 20 rushing attack in the country, but I don't expect much out of their passing game next year. Defensively, they lost a lot of guys, a lot of their top guys, Jared Verse, Brandon Fiskey, Renardo Green, the linebacker, Tatum Bethune. They lost like 5 starters, I think, at least 5 starters to the NFL. A couple guys returned, Ventrell Cypress, Patrick Payton, you know, but man, it's not the same group from last year. They bring in guys like Marvin Jones from Georgia, but I don't see a world where this is going to be the same caliber of defense that we saw last season. Let's take a look at their schedule though. So we know what they did last year. I'll talk about it quickly here. So 5 of their wins were against ranked teams. They went 5-6 against ranked teams, obviously, besides the Georgia game. Their last 5 games, though, if you want to look at that from Pitt to Louisville, their last 5 regular season games, I think that's what it's going to look like next season. I don't think we're going to see many explosive offensive games. I think the defense is going to have to do a lot of the legwork here for Florida State, and maybe the offense can grind out a couple a couple of nasty wins in there. But next season, they do play 5 of my top 30 teams. So it's not an easy schedule, but their first 5 games, I think, are pretty winnable. Memphis and SMU. SMU on the road. I don't love those 2 games, but Memphis isn't a conference game. And SMU, it's not the toughest team to play on the road. And their last 3 games, by the way, are not conference related either. Notre Dame doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So it's really, that stretch from SMU to North Carolina. They play Clemson at home, they go to Miami. How many of those games can you win? No, none of those are easy. SMU, Clemson, Duke, Miami, North Carolina, none of those games are gimmies. But, how good is Florida State? That's really going to determine it. Once they come out of that North Carolina game, it's kind of, because I expect them to lose at Notre Dame. So the season's kind of going to be determined by that 5 game stretch right there. So overall, here, I have a lot of questions about FSU and their offense. Can DJU finally improve, stuff like that? Can they play as well as they did last season against top 30 teams? But I do think it is still possible that they can make back to back ACC championship games, but I'm not so sure that they would be my favorites. And even if they are going to win it next year. Moving on, the final team in this tier here, we are going to talk about Tennessee. Tennessee last season was not able to recreate what they did offensively in 2022. Joe Milton, I think now, with hindsight, it's fair to call him a disappointment. And they did not have their signature win like they had against Alabama 2 years ago. Taking a look at the stats here, they went from, I think they were the number one passing offense in the country. If they weren't first, they were second, I think. So they went from either 1 or 2 to 50th. So there was just a massive drop in their pass attack. They were a top 10 running team in the country, and they did do that incredibly well. They had 3 good running backs in there who all ran the ball incredibly well. They scored over 30 points per game, top 20 in yards per game, did not turn it over that much either. And defensively, I think they were pretty good, pretty underrated defensively. Top 20 in rushing yards allowed, top 10 in sacks. top 40 in total yards and points allowed per game. So it was a pretty well-rounded team actually overall statistically, but they were not able to put it together in their biggest games, I don't think. Let's take a look at their roster, the new and improved roster here. Obviously, the biggest story is Nico L. I'm just going to call him L for now until I learn how to pronounce his last name. He is one of the most important players in college football next season because if he can come in and be that guy as a first year starter, we're talking about Tennessee as a playoff team. Because I look at the rest of the roster around him. Running back, you lost Jabari Small, you lost Jalen Wright, but Dylan Sampson, I think he is a good enough RB1. I don't expect him to carry the load by himself, but I think he is good enough to be a starting running back. Their wide receiving core, I really like their wide receiving core. Squirrel Wright returns. He had nearly 800 yards last season. Chris Brazzell comes in from Tulane. He was their top guy, I believe. And Brew McCoy returns coming off an injury. He's like 25, I think. So he has a lot of experience, great size on him. And they also bring in Holden Stays from Notre Dame, the tight end. So I really think this is the best receiving core they had since that 2022 season. And I think Nico, the job is kind of made easier for him because he does not have to do as much because of the talent around him. Defensively here, James Pierce is being mocked as like the first overall pick because he's just a monster defensively. So that certainly is going to help. The secondary is where I have some issues with. They lost a couple guys. They lost one guy to the NFL, one guy to the transfer portal. They kind of reworked the secondary here. So I'm going to have to see how that looks. I think it's going to take some time for those guys to kind of gel and mesh together. So that would be my point of concern on the roster is their secondary. Let's take a look at their schedule here. What they did last year, honestly, they lost to three top 10 teams, right? Alabama, Missouri, Georgia, lost all those games. The Alabama loss was actually very close. They had the lead early and then it just fell apart in the second half. Um, Missouri and Georgia, you probably don't want to lose by that much. You don't want to get blown out in those two games, I think. But honestly, I don't really expect them to win those games at all. The Florida loss is honestly what defined their entire season. Because if they just would have won that game and they went 9-3 in the regular season, they beat Iowa, people would feel completely different about Tennessee. But that loss honestly just put such a sour taste, in everybody's mouth, and they were not able to recover from that loss really in terms of image. Um, Taking a look at next season, they play four top 30 teams. So that's a fairly light. Honestly, for the SEC, only four of the top 30, that's pretty easy. Georgia, Georgia on the road, pencil that in. That's a loss, right? So let's look at their three other games here. NC State at home week 2, you know, Nico versus Grayson McCall. That's a pretty good matchup. I think they can win that game at home. Oklahoma on the road. That's a tough game to win on the road, but I think Tennessee has the better roster. I think they could have the better offense. That's certainly a massive game in week 4. And Alabama at home, all three of those games, you got two of them at home and the one on the road, I think, first year quarterback, all three of those games are winnable. So it really comes down to their entire season next year. How many of those 3 games can they win? If they win 2 or even 3, certainly I'm thinking Tennessee's a playoff team. Because even if they don't make the SEC championship game, if you go 10-2, I think especially if you beat Alabama. 10-2 with a win over like Alabama and NC State. NC State could potentially win the ACC championship game. So let's say you lose to Oklahoma on the road, right? But you beat the ACC champions in Alabama. I feel like you're a lock. I feel like you're a lock for the college football playoff. You don't even have, you could get blown out by Georgia again. Who cares? Ole Miss got blown out by Georgia last year near the end of the season, and they would have been in the college football 12-team playoff. So I don't really think it matters for Tennessee how that Georgia game goes. So listen, I'm very high on Tennessee as well as Nico as the new quarterback. I think all of their top matchups are going to be incredibly consequential. But I do think 10-2 is very possible, and Tennessee in the playoffs is not outlandish, I don't think, whatsoever. So that's how it ends up, man. We are 3 out of 5 in here. I hope this video if this video fucked up in some way, oh man, I'm gonna be devastated here. But that's gonna be it, man. Thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are new, and I will see y'all on the next one. Peace.